Attention. Debunking Common Objections to Reparations for African Americans is available for PDF download using the secure Dropbox link in the description below. Feel free to download it, share it with your friends, your family, your neighbors, your enemies, whoever it might be. Share the word. That way this information can get out there to the masses. All right? Enjoy the video. There's a scripture out the book of Proverbs, chapter 24, verses 17, that says, "Don't rejoice when your enemies fall. Don't be happy when they stumble." Now, I'm not here to say that Mr. Charlie Kirk was my enemy. Some people may feel as though he was. Personally, I don't know Mr. Kirk. I don't think that someone can be necessarily considered your enemy based on things that you've heard them say necessarily online. Nonetheless, one of the things that Mr. Kirk did speak a lot about, and which we're going to talk about here now, is the topic in the conversation of reparations. And this is obviously one of those conversations that gets a lot of people going, and rightfully so. There's lots of debate, and obviously the foundation of America at its core was based on white supremacy and Black inferiority, manifest destiny, right? Curse of Ham doctrine, all a part of the common conservative Christian theology at the time. And that was the foundation of the nation. So to go from that to a conversation of paying this group of people who have been emancipated from slavery is obviously and quite naturally going to be a controversial topic of conversation. But today, I'm going to get into about seven reasons why, and not just 7 reasons, but 7 rebuttals, right, to some of the more common reasons why certain individuals, such as Charlie Kirk, why they were against reparations. And so before I get into these, I'm going to get into some of his clips, and we're going to break this down logically. Okay, so let's dig into this a bit.
Should Black people get reparations?
I believe they should.
So I, white man, have to play for Black people. Why?
Wow, that's a really selfish thing you just said.
Hold on. Why should I have...
That's a really non-empathetic thing to say.
Why should I have empathy for a race? I have white guilt because I breathe? Why should the white students here have to work harder to pay for Black kids? What is that all about?
Not every Black person has lineage connected to slaves.
That's true.
Every white person doesn't have lineage connected to slaves.
Yes, that's right. So since every Black person doesn't have a lineage connected to slaves, why should we generalize and say reparations for Black people?
Because there are...
So he just talked about 2 of the 7 talking points that we're going to get into, just FYI.
People that are in a worse place.
So over 150 years, they didn't have any ability to make better decisions, to save money, and to invest. How about you take responsibility for your own actions instead of blaming the white man?
And I think that really touches the... I'm so glad Mr. Kirk said that, right? What he just said there at the end really touches the heart of why I believe a lot of conservative Christians are completely against reparations, is because they think that reparations is about blaming the white man, right? When the truth is, and then his other argument is, well, you know, you're still looking to blame somebody else for why you can't do X, Y, and Z. Listen, you have to understand something very important, right, about me and about why this video is important for people like myself. A person's personal success has nothing to do with the legitimacy of their claim for reparations, right? So you can be a Black person who's you could be LeBron James, okay? Or you can be a bum on the corner. It doesn't matter. Your personal life decisions and the outcome of your life has nothing to do with whether or not you should be or are eligible for reparations. That doesn't matter, because we today who are making the decisions were never a part, even though you could say that, you know, we've received or we've been a part of some systematic oppression. We never were actually enslaved people. We never were a part of, you know, Jim Crow slave codes. Some of us may have been impacted. I'm sure most of us have actually been impacted by redlining, which we'll get into. But your personal success has nothing to do with it. Let's go to the next video.
How do you feel about the Black community receiving reparations?
I'm against that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why so?
So here's my view, and I want to hear yours.
Okay.
Which is that I did not own slaves, and you were not a slave.
Correct.
Right. So we are individuals, and therefore we cannot be held accountable or should receive something from something that didn't happen to us or something we did not do. Basically, what you're saying is I'm going to take money from Charlie Kirk for something he didn't do, and give it to a group of something to somebody of something they also didn't do. For what reason? How is that just? So what is a way that we could try to help all communities? Here's maybe we can find some common ground, right?
Well, so I don't even know if we need to hear any more of this because he's talking about helping all communities, but I'm going to let him finish, right?
Instead of reparations,
Sure.
is that we need to break the cartel of public sector teacher unions and make it easier for people of all backgrounds, but specifically Hispanic and Black individuals, to have a quality education.
Right. So he's completely changing he's changing the whole course of the conversation, right? So that's really all I wanted to share and make it clear in terms of Mr. Kirk's perspective on reparations. We'll now get into these 7 items, most of which he actually talked about. So the first one, okay, and before I get out of here, I want to say this, man. Like, look, if any of y'all who are watching this happen to be connected to Mr. Kirk, you know what I'm saying? Like, man, it's a terrible thing what happened to that man. And, you know, like, hey, I pray that he was every bit of a Christian that he claimed. At the end of the day, his salvation is not in my hands. But if that's his claim, I pray that he, as they say, rest in peace, man. You know what I'm saying? Because it's always sad when someone is murdered. And I don't believe that violence is the way to go, especially against people who are undeserving of such violence. So just to make that clear. Okay. So number one, this thing happened too long ago, right? No one alive today owns slaves or was enslaved. And that was one of the things Mr. Kirk said. So people need to understand that reparations is not just about slavery. Okay. Reparations also addresses Jim Crow laws. Okay. Redlining, housing discrimination, mass incarceration, and systemic exclusion from wealth building opportunities, many of which persisted well into the 20th century. This is the reason why when we have these conversations, it's so important to be educated on the history and the long-standing systemic impact of what we call racism or slavery, because you have to understand this. Our case for reparations predates slavery, because what predated slavery was this idea of white supremacy, this theology that those people over there are set to be our slaves, right? Which goes again back into the curse of Ham theology, which was taught from the Christian church of the day. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind as it relates to this is that the effects of what happened back then are ongoing. Okay. So how do we prove that? The average Black household has 1/10 the wealth of the average white household, a direct consequence of policies like FHA loan denials, GI Bill exclusions, and predatory lending. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, no, Black people have 1/10 the wealth because Black people are at the bottom. Black men are at the bottom. And this is the common narrative that you hear about Black men. According to BLS labor and statistic data, right, the average Black male's income is only about, I think the average, okay, is only about $200 less per week than the average white male's income, right? So it cannot just be that white men are working so much harder or so much this or so much that. No, the wealth aspect is not the end result of one generation. Wealth is the result of multiple. I'm talking about real wealth is the result of multiple generations, not just one. Okay. And Germany set a huge precedent for this, right? The German government still pays. How many guys know this? That the German government still pays reparations today to Holocaust survivors and even to some of the descendants of those who went through the Holocaust who are not a part of the Holocaust itself. Okay. And then, of course, through the claims conference, Germany has paid more than $90 billion, okay, since 1952, and continues to provide pension, healthcare benefits, and compensatory or compensation, I guess you could say is a better word, for loss of property. Okay. This shows that governments can acknowledge the generational, multi-generational, the historic wrongs decades later. Okay. And that reparations should not be limited to the direct victims of the event, but also to their descendants who still live with the consequences. The other thing to keep in mind is that the individuals who benefited most from slavery, you could say, if you want to pinpoint it, you would say slave owners, right? The wealth or whatever it was that they inherited as a result of slavery, they still have to this day, right? Like, this is, no one says, well, you're disqualified from your inheritance because you weren't a part of what your predecessor did. No, that's the whole point of the inheritance. The whole point is you do this, that, and the third today so that you can pass this down without that person ever having to do anything. You just receive it, right? No one says, oh, well, you're not qualified to receive this inheritance because you weren't the person who worked for it. Like, that's unjust in itself, right? So it should not, in the same vein, you shouldn't say, well, this was a long time ago, you weren't a slave, so therefore you would be ineligible for this. No, that's not a logical argument when you understand the totality of the conversation. Number two, it would be unfair. This is, again, what Charlie Kirk kept going on. It would be unfair to make people who weren't responsible pay for it. And this is actually an easy one to debunk. Taxpayers routinely fund remedies for wrongs they didn't personally have anything to do with, right? For example, the bank bailouts, disaster relief funds, settlements, and corporate misconduct. Reparations are not about individual guilt. And this is what people have to understand. Reparations are not about individual guilt. No one is saying you, Mr. White Man, are responsible for what happened to Black people. That's not what this is about, okay? But this is about the nation's responsibility, the United States government, like the United States responsibility. Because again, it was the US government and its institutions that enforced and profited from slavery and racial discrimination. So the government as an entity owes its debt, okay? And many still benefit today. As I mentioned earlier, generational wealth, inherited property, and access to better schools and neighborhoods came from racially exclusive policies, okay? Number three, it would be too expensive, right? We can't afford it, okay? So the thing with this is that cost is relative, okay? The US spends trillions of dollars on wars, bailouts, and subsidies. Reparations are an investment, okay, in closing the racial wealth gap, which would boost the overall economy through greater consumer spending, entrepreneurship, and tax revenue, okay? Because we understand that Black Americans are in a unique position in America in the sense that we don't have a legacy from some other place that we're going to just go spend all this money or whatever this resource. We're not going to go spend it elsewhere. Most of that money will get circulated right back into the American economy, okay? And the cost of not addressing it is actually higher. Here's another point, is that the cost of not addressing the need is actually higher, right? Racial inequality fuels poverty, crime, and lost productivity, okay, which burdens taxpayers annually, right? So in other words, if you think that keeping people poor is like, imagine the wealth that America could manifest by investing in many of its poor. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes people just need an opportunity, a leg up, basically a foot in the door. And oftentimes the barrier to that entry includes poverty, you know, the neighborhoods that people come from, you know, terrible education, et cetera, right? So we're trying to unlock this untapped potential, and reparations could do that as well too. And of course, the other key is that reparations could take many forms, right? Cash, housing grants, debt cancellation, land, business investment, education programs, et cetera, right? Not a single cut a check model, right? So I'm not saying I would be against them cutting a check, but it can take many forms, okay, is the entire point, okay? Number four, and this is an interesting one here, it would be divisive and create resentment. Oh, this is a good one. It would be divisive and create resentment. So the question is, did the reparations that Germany pays to the Jews, did that create resentment in Germany? Okay. No. Okay. Ignoring, this is the real resentment. Ignoring injustice fuels division more than confronting it. Okay. This is the reality. Truth and reconciliation, the process of that, right? For example, between South Africa and Germany, or in South Africa and Germany, shows that acknowledgement and repair build unity, okay? Acknowledgement and repair build unity. Other groups such as Japanese Americans, Holocaust survivors, Native tribes in America received reparations without tearing the nation apart, okay? In fact, these programs are now viewed as just and necessary, okay? If handled transparently, right? If we are having open conversation and if these policies are passed in a transparent fashion, this can actually strengthen, right, the democracy of this nation by showing that the government truly values justice for all, not just with their mouths, but also with their actions, okay? The other question would be number 5. How do we know who qualifies, right? This is something that Charlie Kirk talked about when he said, well, Black people in general, right? And listen, I do believe that there should be criteria for it, right? Criteria, of course, can be defined, right? Just as they were for Japanese internment reparations, right? Lineage-based reparations is the whole point, right? So people will say that reparations is discriminatory because you're saying on the basis of race, people would be. So no, we're not going on the basis of race. This is a lineage-based thing that people should be able to track through their lineage, okay? The U.S. Census, Social Security, and tribal membership programs already maintain ancestry-based criteria for benefits, okay? It's not impossible, to do it this way, okay? Number 6, my ancestors, and this is another good one. My ancestors were poor immigrants who didn't own slaves. So why should I pay, right? So like, for example, the Irish or other poor groups who came here who were immigrants, right? Other people who've migrated in the recent years, maybe from South America, Central America, even from Africa, right? Why should we have to pay for this, right? So even if your family arrived later, what a lot of people don't realize is that they still benefited. For example, the Irish still benefited from systems designed to favor whites over blacks. This is the reality of it, meaning housing access, jobs, schooling, social mobility. All of these things favored the class of people who were at the time, or still, you could say, at the top. And of course, that was white people. The US government, not individual slave owners, codified racial discrimination into law. This is what people need to understand. Racial discrimination, racism in itself was always codified into law. This is not a figure of speech. This is not just something that people on the street do. This is something that the actual laws of the land made room for, right? So for example, there were these things called black codes, which were designed to keep, slaves and their children illiterate. There were actual laws and policies in certain areas and neighborhoods that said that a black person could not testify in court against a white person, basically opening the door for all sorts of murder, rape, robbery, crime. Every type of crime that you could imagine could be committed against a black body because it was actually in law to discriminate against black people and prevent them from being able to testify in court, okay? So many immigrants today were able to become white, okay, in America and gain access to opportunities deliberately denied to African Americans, okay? And lastly, number 7, reparations won't solve racism. And that's a valid argument. And I would say true. Reparations won't erase racism, right, overnight, but they directly address the material inequalities that racism has created, okay? Without economic justice, anti-racism efforts are symbolic at best, okay? Reparations tackle the wealth gap, which is one of the most measurable and persistent legacies of racism in America today. So ending injustice requires both changing hearts and correcting structures, okay? Reparations are about the structural side, okay? So the bottom line is simply this. Reparations are not about punishing individuals, okay? It's not about punishing anyone, but about the United States government fulfilling an unpaid debt for centuries of state-sanctioned harm to a specific lineage of people. That is the point. Other nations and groups have done it. The US has done it before, and the economic, moral, and democratic case is very, very strong for reparations for the descendants of slaves in America, right? FBA, whatever you want to call it, okay? So this is the 7, most common rebuttals to reparations. I encourage you all to go back through this video again, watch it, listen to it again, and really think about what I'm saying and ask yourself, like, does this make sense, right? You have to be careful when you listen to people like Charlie Kirk, to be quite honest, or individuals like him who don't Like their talking points are just designed to make you have an emotional response. And they're usually very surface level conversations. They're not digging deeper into the history. They're not doing the research. They don't really understand or know what they're talking about, right? But they're sitting here with this strong opinion about a thing. And it's like, well, no, you just are against that. So you're just using this basic base level understanding and this emotional word salad mumbo jumbo to try to get people on your side, right? If we're going to have a logical debate, an actual intellectual conversation about the matter, it should involve history. It should be reasonable. It should be balanced. And the viewpoints of many, not few, but many should be heard, right? So, hey, man, I hope you guys enjoyed this video for real. Like, share, subscribe, comment below. Tell me what you think. Until we chat again, I'm out of here.